Chapter 22. Monday noon. Doreen checked the date that Manny disappeared and realized she didn't have an exact date. She'd have to go back and ask Peter because she couldn't just call him. She settled on looking at the date on Manny's letter and realized it was 1 week before Norbert the banker's death. With that noted down in her own case file, she realized she hadn't checked to see if anything in Solomon's files were about Norbert. And she hadn't gotten as far as the W's in those boxes either. Shaking her head hard, she had to get something done on the rest of Solomon's files, at least preparing that index of the file names, completing her scans of each summary sheet just to quickly know which case files Solomon had information on. As it was, she got up and headed to the closet, pulled out the third and fourth boxes, then found one with Norbert's name on it in the final box. Excited, she pulled it out and wondered why she hadn't thought about checking the complete digital copy she had made of all the files in these 4 boxes when she first had received them. But she had the paper file in front of her now. Doreen was certain Norbert's file would make a fascinating read, but she was grateful for the summary. So much easier to grasp a lot of info in a short time. According to Solomon's notes, the bank manager had been accused of stealing from the bank in the months prior to his death. It had ended up as an open issue at the time of his death. He had profusely denied any wrongdoing. Hence, even up to the point Norbert was killed, no charges had been brought against him. He died soon afterward. Doreen went back and checked what day of the week it was when he died. It was a Friday. That correlated with what Mac had said. That half explained the other coworker having dinner across the street. A lot of people went out for dinner on a Friday versus during the week. But then that was a generalization she couldn't necessarily apply here. Potentially Norbert could have just stepped out into the road and been killed, happy to have had an end to what could have been a humiliating and painful lesson about taking what didn't belong to you. What Doreen found interesting, however, was that the area where Norbert died was just a few blocks from the corner where Peter and Manny lived and worked much of the time. Apparently, that had been their corner forever. Was Norbert heading over to talk to Manny? Was he on the way to the beach to take a walk and to clear his head? Or was he just tired after working late and stepped off the road without looking first? Maybe he was heading out for another reason too, like going out for dinner. His vehicle had been still parked around the back of the bank. That was odd. As she continued to read through Solomon's notes, it revealed more tidbits that Solomon had gleaned about the theft from inside the bank. But then Solomon's very last line was a question that asked if Norbert Watkins was guilty or if he had been set up. Set up? It was right in front of her in black and white. What if Norbert had been set up? His death could have been a pretty quick end to the investigation. A very convenient end to the issue if nobody kept looking for other suspects. Maybe someone else at the bank was stealing and saw Norbert as the fall guy? For that matter, maybe he wanted the money to run off with Manny? She frowned as she tapped the table on that thought. Then, wondering further, she went back to her research and found out Norbert had a wife but no kids. He was older than his wife, according to the announcement in the newspaper. By 20 years. Her eyebrows rose. Did he have money as a bank manager? He had a decent job, but that didn't make him super wealthy. Still, he must have had some spending money if he was keeping up a weekly relationship with Manny. And did his wife know about Manny? That would have been a hard thing to accept. At least it would have been for Doreen. Yet at the same time, Doreen wondered if maybe the wife was happy to have Norbert's attentions focused elsewhere. She wrote down the wife's name, which was Lynette, and how she had since been married to a Dean Porter. Noting that name, she tracked down Dean Porter. He was an investment banker. And so back into the banking world Lynette had gone. Maybe Norbert's wages were decent, but did an investment banker make better money? He might be in a private business with his own company, but Doreen couldn't find anything to prove that. But then she caught sight of the nuptials date, only 30 days after her husband's death. "Wow, that's cold," Doreen said as she sat back. "That's really cold." Obviously, it wasn't a happy marriage if she had grieved, had buried her husband, and had fallen in love all over again within 30 days. No way to find an address online. Doreen checked the phone book and did find them listed. They lived on Dilworth Mountain. According to some tidbits she'd heard, Dilworth Mountain was one of the hoity-toity places. "So, you moved up in life with this marriage, didn't you?" Doreen asked Lynette's picture. "Doing the social climb." "Well, it's been 10 years, so I wonder how that's working out for you." What did Doreen really know? She went over the notes in her head as she jotted them down in order. Was killed by accident? Or was it murder? Did Norbert have anything to do with Manny's disappearance? Did his wife have anything to do with Norbert's death? And what are the chances, Doreen mused out loud, that the wife had something to do with her husband's death? A month to remarry is very suspicious indeed. Then again, maybe Norbert had committed suicide by stepping in front of a bus or whatever. His life was crashing down around him, and for all Doreen knew, he might have been in a health crisis as well. Once again, so many unanswered questions. She sent a note off to Mac, asking if an autopsy had been done, or if any underlying health conditions had been found in the banker's case. Then, knowing he wouldn't get back to her anytime soon, she stood and made herself a sandwich, even as she eyed the pasta. She would save the spaghetti for dinner. She sat outside, sharing her sandwich with the critters and realizing she should have made half a sandwich more, just so she had enough to share. She was determined to get through the third box of Solomon's research and fully index it, like she had the others. It would take her hours, and she wasn't looking forward to it. She looked at her garden and deemed it more appealing. But then she'd done half, and needed to get the other half finished. After eating, she sat down and worked her way steadily through Solomon's third box. It went a lot faster than she had expected. Finally, with that third box done, she put away that box and then grabbed the fourth box. She still had several hours left this afternoon. She opened the box and started working away. By the time a knock came at her door, she had only one folder left. She groaned and straightened, rubbing her lower back. Muggs barked like crazy again. She called out, "I'm coming," but by the time she got there, Mac had opened the door and stepped inside. He looked at her as she straightened and stretched. "Have you been out doing heavy digging again?" She shook her head. "No, I was trying to do an index of Solomon's files and all his summaries." He had a file on the banker. Mac's eyebrows shot up to his hairline. "He did." Doreen nodded. "And, since you have a digital copy of all Solomon's files too, you can go home and read it on your own time." He laughed. "Well, what made you think to look?" "Because I was looking for information online, and it was a little skimpy, so it occurred to me that maybe Solomon had something. Then, when I found it, I realized I hadn't finished doing the indexing of his boxes I had inherited." "By indexing, you mean?" "I mean, typing in all the names and the basics from the summary. I've already scanned in all the summaries. I figure I'll print off the index and keep it handy, so I can easily look anything up anytime I want." "Maybe," he said. "You've got it all digitized though, so." "But it's hard to search for something in all those folders if you don't have it organized with each of the names in the front. So, why don't you attach the index with all the summaries?" "I was thinking of it. I renamed all the scans, so that's something. Maybe if I have a folder system and rename the folders, I'll keep everything together and have them a little more organized." Mac stepped out on the back deck and said, "Figured you'd be out here gardening." "I would be," she said, "if it appealed more than doing this, but I'm one folder away from finishing, and I wanted the job done." She motioned at him as she sat down and said, "I'll just do this last one real quick." "Coffee?" he asked while eyeing her empty cup. Go put some on. I guess I should bring you some more, he said with a laugh. No need, she said. You've been feeding me enough. I can certainly share my coffee. Actually, I was wondering if there was leftover spaghetti, he said. I think I'm developing a craving for it. Doreen laughed. I had a sandwich for lunch so I could save it for dinner. Take a look and tell me how much there is. We ate quite a bit of it last night, he admitted. She kept typing away, trying to ignore his actions as he made coffee, and then pulled out the pasta and the leftover sauce. When she was finally done, she saved everything and put all the physical folders back inside the fourth box and put it in the front closet. She left out the banker's file though, letting it remain on the kitchen table. Finally done, she said. It seems like I had so many unfinished jobs that I never quite got anywhere. I know the feeling. Right now, we have so many cases where we're trying to cross the T's and dot the I's, that it's pretty impossible. Right. I've kept you busy. You think? Speaking of which, Doreen said as she returned to the kitchen, did you find 6 bodies on Steve's property? Max straightened, looked at her, and said, how did you know there were 6? I went to the property, she admitted. All the police tape was gone, and just the markers and these horrible slashes into the property remained. We did find 6 bodies, he said. I'm not sure if the police are done yet though. Do we have any IDs on the bodies yet? Not yet. Doreen nodded. I suppose if we go the DNA route, it can take time. Yes, and X-rays of the teeth can help identify each body, which is often what we end up doing. We don't have anybody to match DNA with in most of these old cases. By the same token, you probably don't have too much in the way of dental records either. Actually, we do sometimes. Good, she said. We're assuming it's at least the 3 women who Steve paid off from the house fires? You know how I feel about assumptions, he said cheerfully. Doreen rolled her eyes at him and realized he was doing something with the noodles. She walked over to see him pouring olive oil into the leftover noodles. She looked at it doubtfully. Do you think there's enough? He nodded. There's definitely enough. Good, she said, because I'm starving. That sandwich, I had to share it times 3. Then she realized Thaddeus was on Mac's shoulder. She stared at him. What's this? Favoritism. And didn't Thaddeus lean over and rub his forehead along Mac's cheek? She shook her head at him. You come over here, steal my food, and steal my animals. Hardly, he countered. I do have some information. She stepped back and asked, does it have something to do with why you were called away last night? He shrugged. Kinda. Does it have something to do with Steve's case? He shook his head. No. So what then? I didn't see anything on the news yet. Good, he said with a note of humor. It means that some of our methods to keep the media out of the loop worked. So what's the matter then? We found a set of remains.